I meant to start this reading vlog on the 24th, but I had a bunch of books I had to read to get off my Kindle Unlimited to make space for this one so I even could start it. And I figured for the last Plated Prisoner series, which is like an epic, sweeping, romantasy style story, we'd have a cozy reading vlog with me and the doggos. Many longtime viewers probably remember that this channel happened on a futon with me and my dog Willow. Willow is still alive and well and may or may not be making appearances here in the video. That's why I've got the ginormous dog bed, because now I have the second dog, which is Haven. In case anyone was wondering, Willow is a Great Dane hybrid that I rescued, while Haven is a 9-month-old purebred Great Dane. Yes, you are. Which very much still makes her a puppy, as giant breeds take a whole 2 years to finish developing. So she can be kind of like rambunctious and unpredictable, and it's just easier for me if I'm going to be sitting somewhere and doing something for a long time to bring out the memory of home dog bed and sitting here with her. Look, it's Haven. Here she is. Oh, what do you see? I'm not sure how well this reading vlog is gonna go. Historically, I haven't done super well with them, and certainly I've got like this big doggo in frame, so that may or may not affect things. For anyone who's curious, right on this side I have a huge bay window, which is what Haven's looking out at. And this guy right here is a vibrating collar. It is not a shock collar, and we don't actually vibrate her that often anymore. It really only means when she's far away from me and I'm trying to get her attention and she needs to turn around and look at me, and that's all the vibration has ever done for me. Sometimes it doesn't even do that. But without further ado, here we are with Goldfinch by Raven Kennedy. Let's go ahead and finish this series strong. I'm excited. Okay, so we're starting off here with Slade's perspective, and I am finding that kind of interesting because Slade was just about to go into like a grand epic battle, or minimally he was gonna lead the troops there, drop them off, and then go after his girlfriend there, Oren. Just a reminder, Slade's heart is literally rotting out of his body right now, and it looks like he's gonna die if he doesn't reconnect with Oren. Hey. Willow appearance! Surprise guest Willow appearance! In book 3 or 4, I can't remember which, Oren's ribbons get cut off and cleave from her body, and for some reason Slade holds on to one of them and like keeps it like some kind of memento or keepsake or connection to Oren. And I've kind of been letting it go this whole time, but I gotta say it's really creepy and gross. Like, when you consider it, Oren's ribbons were part of her body, like a living piece of her. And I think we're supposed to consider it like someone keeping a lock of a loved one's hair. But since the ribbons could move on their own and lift and carry things and be used as weapons, I view them more like a tail or like a finger or something. And just imagine someone close to you keeping a finger that had been severed like in their pocket. Yep. Slade just promised a child his Timberwing wouldn't get hurt again. Who wants to bet this Timberwing now dies? While Argo survives and gets to live a quote-unquote happy life with Slade and Orin, he never goes back to Fourth Kingdom, so that little girl doesn't know. I thought that was especially cruel. Now, I know these two K characters are here as a plot contrivance just to make sure that Argo and Risa survive so all the court characters can be happy at the end. But here's the thing, we brought this girl back, so let's go ahead and treat her like a real person and a real thing and give her some kind of wrap-up. We had 20 million endings in this book and we couldn't bother with this little girl. So I've been reading this incredibly dramatic death scene of Slade dying in the first 3 chapters, which has no tension or meaning to me because there's a whole flippin' 700-page book to get to, and we know Slade doesn't die like this. Finally break into this janky-ass visual poem. I don't want to be disrespectful, but the poems that have existed throughout these books have sucked. They provide no extra data, they're not actually poetic, they're overly dramatic in their punctuation and their separation, and literally he's just saying the same thing he already said when he ends with "I can feel her." Like, Frosky, you just told me that. I don't need a flippin' poem to tell me that. And then next page is Orin, her stupid ass poem. This poem is particularly frustrating and annoying because in the last book she was getting like mind erased or mind controlled or whatever. So a lot of this stuff with her marching over the border to Aurea just shouldn't be happening this way. I mean, I guess I'm gonna be happy about it because I didn't want to do an amnesia arc at the end of 6 books, but I don't know, we'll see. The book is young. So Slade and Orin have had like this darkness and light kind of dichotomy going on between the two of them, but I don't really like the descriptive prose going on here in Slade's chapter where he's talking about like burning and like the sun and heat, because Orin's powers, while they have been literally liquid gold, have never been described as burning, heat, painful. She wades through the gold all the time, and most of the people exposed to liquid gold turn into gold way before they feel any heat. So this like extra additional layer feels very forced, out of character with the rest of the story. Orin's powers cannot reverse the rotting damage that Slade's powers have, or at least they can't on their own. Perhaps the mating bond is like a love cures all kind of story. And even if Orin's powers could heal or reverse the rot damage in some kind of way, it wouldn't be through like a burning cauterization kind of effect, because his heart is what's rotting, and if you cauterize the heart then it can't keep doing its job. All the imagery like leading into like a golden scale protecting his heart, very convoluted and confusing. Just hit the Risa chapters, and I hate the Risa-Osric relationship. I don't like that he doesn't respect her space, and he just barges into rooms and demands that she put up with it because she almost died and that was hard on him. I'm sure that was hard on her. And I'm also not super fond of how Risa's like feelings and history have been kind of rewritten. Like, she now cares a lot about Oren and they were good friends. They were sort of building that bond right before Risa was stabbed, but they haven't really interacted since then, and the interaction up to that point was not enough to give us this like good buddies, I care about her kind of hurrah. I think this relationship annoys me partially because it took Oren and Slade so long to get there, and they had like a great slow burn romance, and this is just a quick twisty, it's done, we have chemistry, we relate to each other, we love each other, without any of the work, and it feels so unearned, and some of the conversation now is even bothering me. Like over here, Osric says, I know things are a lot right now. Oh my god, do you have to use that kind of terminology and phrasing? Couldn't you have said that in a way that felt less like millennial slang coded? And I know I'm complaining a lot right now, so let me say that I am still very curious in the Oren Slade getting together, what happens at this war of the world, so to speak. The book is really testing my patience right now in getting to that final standoff. I wish we would hurry up and get there. So Risa's argument with Polly kind of like highlights exactly what the issue is between Osric and Risa's relationship. Polly is stupid for putting her faith in a man and not trusting Risa, but here Risa is putting her faith in a man, and in fact all the intelligence she's getting is from said man. In this direct comparison in the text that's supposed to prove that this is like true and real love and that Osric is like a good guy and these other men are not good men, it just highlights to me how these characters don't know each other at all, and definitely don't know each other well enough to sort of differentiate like that or be anything other than sort of large hypocrites in this moment. It happens to be true that the Fae are marching on Aurea. It happens to be true that Osric is probably a better guy than whoever Polly is with right now. But we don't even really know that for sure as far as like his relationship track record goes. I don't even feel like I know Osric that well in the text, like in a personality point period. I kind of thought that him him and Riot should have been the same person for a long time. Which brings me back to Riot. This loyalty and care for the Fourth Kingdom, him feeling like Aurea is his place and his people, sort of is like coming out of nowhere. He could have been just loyal to like the town that him and his brother set up, which has now disappeared. He could feel his loyalty only to those servants because only they understand what happened between him and his mom. He could have just had like strong family ties, so him like extending out into being dedicated to this army and this kingdom is just weird. And all this argument is happening because he wants to take Risa with him into battle? That's the stupidest thing I've ever fucking heard and is incredibly selfish on his part. Like, Risa has no fighting skills at all, and she's not used to this kind of harsh travel, so like all of this feels very unfair and cruel to her, and I feel like she'd be in a better position to protect herself in a city where she like learns the ins and outs of the city, ways to escape, all that kind of stuff, while like traveling and being at the heart of the battle is something else entirely, and I just think this is a stupid idea. Not buying this explanation for why Slade has an affinity for birds. I kind of just like that it was a childhood fascination and like he was slow and patient with them and earned their trust. This thing where he's connected to like dragon riders or dragon tamers and all wing things are cool with dragons just doesn't add up. Are dragons feathered in this world? Because if they're like all bird-like, maybe I'd give it to them the same way I gave them the timber wings and the birds. But if dragons are scaled creatures, then I'm less inclined to give it to them. I understand birds and reptiles have some similarities between the two of them that are like fairly startling when compared with mammals. I think about how birds eat lizards and snakes are likely to eat birds, and I just don't see them all getting along or having a hierarchy where they all obey the same being or recognize the same creature's authority over them. Sidebar, I have to kind of wonder if dragon was the original plan. It feels very out of place, especially because like in the last book we met a dragon-like creature and then learned that dragons were not a thing in this world. And I guess it could have been like foreshadowing to show how quote-unquote special and unique this is. But honestly, Slade is pretty like the specialist special, most powerful shadow boo to ever walk anyways. He doesn't need this dragon thing to like add to that. Orin is equally pretty powerful and skilled, so like we don't need a dragon to help her out either. I'm really wondering if the dragon riding thing is just like part of capitalizing on what's popular at the time and like continuing to propel this series into a viral hit. I don't know, we'll probably never know if this was the original intention or if they were just like writing as they were going, but it feels very convenient. I have a wall of great day. What am I supposed to do with this? What am I supposed to do? Since we last spoke, there've been a couple Melina chapters. Hey then. And one of the things that we witnessed in the Melina chapters is Mist having to give birth while the Fae were there, them doing something terrible to the baby, and Mist dying. All of which I thought was really useless and like without purpose. I don't know, occasionally this book just does things that are needlessly mean and cruel for no apparent reason. And I'm really just not down with it. I'm not 100% confident how often this has happened in the past, but in this book I haven't loved it. I'm especially not fond with Kingsley and Melina's interaction here either, or the fact that I thought we were gonna get like this really cool face-off in the Fifth Kingdom with everyone coming together to join the fight against the Fae and Aurum being there on the other side. And we're not gonna get any of that. We're not gonna get any Melina kind of being Robin Hood in the woods. I just feel like we set these cool ideas up in the last book. Okay, girlfriend, are you gonna let me Are you gonna let me go back to reading? I don't know if she's gonna let me go back to reading, guys. She's barely let me talk to this camera. This is just part of having the puppy. You got to see her being sleepy. And now we're seeing her trying to play with me. I wouldn't mind so much, except Willow is back here, and I'm trying to keep her weaker back legs from getting pushed around by the puppers. Having a senior dog and a puppy at the same time is definitely not like an ideal combo. Even when I'm not down on the floor, they're up on me, giving me all the troubles. All the troubles, aren't you? Don't, you'll mess up my lipstick. Girlfriend, come on, get down. As is now tradition for these attempted plated prisoners reading vlogs, I haven't actually vlogged all that much or done that well, giving you my thoughts along the way, but I am going to try to close out a couple of unscripted thoughts about the end of this Plated Prisoner series. For me personally, this has been a huge disappointment. There were just a lot of things I wanted to see in this last book that we didn't do. We had invested a lot of time and energy into the Fourth Kingdom and into Slade's rule. I know he was shifting priorities to be more Orin focused and less like a good king, and I know like his ability to be a great king in general was sort of like on the fence. It was always more like these premiers working behind the scenes, advising and doing the real work of leading, which was kind of giving us this message that even though it's a rule in Aurea that the rulers have to have powers to be in charge, it's actually the day-to-day normal folks who are more capable of knowing what other Orians need or want and making sure that that will is getting done. But as we have set this series up, Fourth Kingdom is like the only kingdom that's kind of sort of okay to its citizens, where generally people seem happy, well-fed, and treated with general respect. I was invested in this kingdom being good, maybe even like teaching other kingdoms lessons or like transferring that knowledge, and we needed an official moment where we transfer power over from like these rulers with powers into the premiers or like a democratic system or some other kind of law so that anybody is able to be a good leader, can be a good leader. And instead of doing that, we jump right into Anwin. We don't know if the premiers get to continue ruling Fourth Kingdom, if Fourth Kingdom gets to remain intact at all, or if the other leaders take over ruling that space, redivide the continent. And with the way Calla immediately goes back to like her scheming, conniving kind of ways, it's kind of heavily implied that Fourth Kingdom is in serious trouble and everyone who would have been able to defend it or push back is now in Anwin. And maybe that shouldn't matter because a lot of the people I care about in this world are also now in Anwin, so like who even cares what happens to Aurea? Except me. I do. I always thought part of the messaging of this series was that like powers or no, you can do the right thing, you can make a difference, and you can be a leader. And if that's part of this series' messaging, then we should see it through in Aurea and make sure we cement the Fourth Kingdom as like a safe haven and a model. Also, there are characters that don't end up in Anwin that I sort of kind of still care about. Like, I don't mind Keg or Keg's family, like his sister and the two premiers who are his parents. All of them are fine enough characters, good enough people, worked really hard and were behind the scenes supporting and deserved like a little something. I already mentioned I like the two kids fine enough, even though they're mostly props, and would have liked to make sure that they had a family that was looking after them, that they were safe and secure. I had come to like sort of be okay with Thold, and having a chance to see whether or not Calla is able to pull the wool over his eyes again, or whether or not he's able to persevere, seems important to me. There just is a lot of loose ends here that don't get tied together. I think I already mentioned it, but it would have been more than enough just to see Mist dead. We didn't need that conversation to happen between her and Queen Melina. Like that extra level of cruelty with the Fae where they would rip like a newborn infant from a dying mother, leave her to die, and then torture and kill the baby. I don't know why we needed that. It felt like needlessly cruel, mean-spirited, extra hurt for no reason. Before this story, I would have told you she tackles very dark material and usually gives it like a long, fulfilling arc where there's eventually payoff, a good slow burn, a good like balance between healing and heartfelt moments and like terrible things that people have to recover from. I do really feel like this book betrays all that though. Not just the scene with Mist, the way the dragon stuff plays out with Slade, where he just randomly has the power of a dragon, randomly gets the dragon has one triumphant scene, then the thing gets murdered, and then at the end he just gets himself a new dragon. Raven Kennedy has always had these extreme scenes of people like losing parts of themselves, saying that it's never gonna come back, and them dealing with those repercussions. You know, like we see that a little bit with Oren's ribbons, where Midas cuts all of them off, and for a long time it looks like she's not ever gonna get them back at all, and she has to learn to fight and redo her balance and like dress herself and all kinds of things she took for granted with the ribbons. Then last book she got the ribbons back, but she couldn't use them at all. They were just like dead weight on her back, which I thought was fascinating. And this last book, she finally is able to use those ribbons again. And it's only through like overcoming extreme torture and like memory warping that she gets that ability back. So it felt like it was 100% earned and a full arc, which meant even though I had mixed feelings about her ever getting those ribbons back instead of learning just to live with the loss, I was like, okay, this is like a decent payoff. This is fine. I think Raven Kennedy understands what needs to be done to make this sort of theming work. And then I see her do this shit with Slade and the dragon, and I realized I was just lucky with the ribbon subplot. Apparently, she has no problem making someone super incredibly powerful, more powerful than they have to be, forcing all their backstory to tie back into some very vague, weird magic instead of just letting it be a personality trait and letting it be like an endearing moment. Implying this thing is super important and that they're bonded, and what happens to one happens to the other, having that thing die off, and then just like rebuilding it without any work or effort later on. Like, to me, this dragon is completely meaningless in every single way. It doesn't feel earned that he gets it. He already felt overpowered, so this feels like annoying in that regard. It doesn't serve a purpose or like do anything. We don't really understand its rules or limitations or what it means to have a dragon, or if this is like a separate being or a manifestation of his power that sometimes is physical and sometimes it's not. We don't understand what it means to kill this dragon. We don't understand what it means for him to regrow the dragon. And really, truly, I don't think the dragon was ever part of the plan of this book. I feel like Raven Kennedy took so long writing this series, which is no shade to her, that part's fine, that she saw the huge popularity rise in Fourth Wing and said like, I'm gonna incorporate a dragon, that way I've got the Fae romance of the Court of Thorns and Roses, and I've got the dragon part of Fourth Wing, so I have everything in mind. Like, when really she doesn't. I like her stories, and I like this series generally speaking, but it's not all bad. She's terrible at writing female characters in general, and really bad at female relationships. Oren doesn't have a single female friend until she meets that one Fae, Emery, and it feels like Raven Kennedy does everything she can to keep Oren and Emery separate, and also to sort of like break their friendship. And I might add that Emery is not human like the Orions are. She is Fae. So it sort of feels like only Fae women can be decent and human women are inherently awful. And you know, as a human woman, I sort of have an issue with that. I don't like Melina or Risa or Polly. Lou's fine. Okay, so Lou is a good human character too and does okay. But generally women are petty, they're conniving, they're backstabbing in this world. They're very short-sighted. They care only about themselves and their own prestige. They seem to cling to the patriarchy and sexism and strong men as a way to like climb the ladder. And since we see no evidence of this ever working, it's like, but why? And because we do have powerful queens like Calla and Melina here in this world, I felt like we had a real opportunity to do something interesting with them. Even if these characters were going to be villains, we could have done it in like a less stereotypical way. Like, I've got Calla literally being the gossip girl and Melina literally being the jealous woman on the other side. It's like, why? I might also add that Melina's only access to a redemptive arc through death is cliche and like very short-sighted, and also a pretty shallow understanding of what it means to like create justice or redemption. And I don't know that she needed to do that. Like, in the moment, breaking the bridge makes sense, but she keeps like insisting that the Fae world and the Orion world should not be connected. They need to be separate things, and that like it's inherently evil they're connected. And since the book ends up executing on eliminating the bridge entirely, it seems to be implying in the narrative that her take on that was correct. And I see no evidence of this. Fae and Orion relationships seem to be generally positive, or at least equally negative as like Orion on Orion relationships or Fae on Fae relationships. And indeed, if you look at the history, which I had to do for my Plated Prisoners timeline, it seems like the Fae have become a better species for being in contact with Orions, and things that Orions value most, like power and magic and like certain kinds of goods and progress, are all things the Fae brought to their world. So there's been a lot of great cross-pollination culturally between the two. It seems like that should continue with a bridge of some kind. This book was very Lord of the Rings in its ending. It just went on and on and on, and I was done at the 75% mark after we had destroyed Slade's dad. I was like, why do I still have so much book left? Which I found out pretty early and was very anticlimactic and boring, and like I just generally didn't care. I will say I've been complaining that Riot, Osric, and Judd were pretty much the same character, and I didn't understand why we needed all three of them. Maybe they should be one character or like two very distinct characters. And Judd dies here in the final battle, so I think he's been an extra the whole time. And Raven Kennedy always knew she was going to kill him off. The battles do feel really anticlimactic, and there's a lot of them in here, mostly because Raven Kennedy gave us a lot of red shirts, and the red shirts are the ones who are dying. I would have loved if we had been more involved in the battles, if people who we had known and who mattered to us actually like engaged in the fighting. If Slade and Orrin weren't so overpowered in this last book that there was never any threat to them physically. Like, the last battle between Cole, Slade, and Orrin feels very contrived, because it seems like the two of them should very easily be able to take out Cole, and they're just not. The whole like nets that like stick to the ground and keep any power from coming out, there's just not a lot explaining the magic system and the powers and how common these power nullifying things are. But based off of how everyone responds to the anklets and how out of place those are, these nets seem even more rare and strange. So I have to wonder like who made them, why. I do think that this book itself was probably like a 2-star read for me personally. I ended up doing a lot of skimming over a lot of parts because I don't like the romantic relationships between any of the characters besides Slade and Orrin. And at this point in time, I don't like Slade as a human being. I think the man should be in jail. And because of that, I'm also not super fond of how he and Orrin interact. I think some of the feral face stuff was like fun in the first books, but here in these books where we still don't really have like a great explanation or understanding of a lot of things going on, I just found it kind of cliche and boring. I like the idea of this pair bonding thing that takes time to like click into place before both of them really know about it, but they have an inexplicable draw before that. And I like the way that Orrin is largely unaware of it until the very end, and even Slade, because we get limited elements of his chapter and perspective. If he was or wasn't aware is kind of up in the air a little bit, even though he like retroactively claims he always knew. So the pair bonding is like kind of a fun play on a fated mates trope. I love that Orrin doesn't end up being queen of the Fae world, even though all the Fae want to put her on the pedestal. I think she was really smart when she says like it's a lot of responsibility to be a queen and I just want to live for me. I'm kind of surprised she doesn't like want to go out adventuring with Slade, but I don't know, maybe I'm projecting too much like curiosity and desire to see the world and be free on her that like she doesn't really feel. I'm super glad we don't end up with the book with her being pregnant, or at least like where I stopped reading, which is when Slade brought out his new dragon. I was like, okay, I'm done with this book. No more ending for me. They hadn't got pregnant. Something I really hate in the romance genre in general is like how pregnancy and child rearing is portrayed. Like, if you want to have a kid, that's fine. I want everyone to live their own life. But I think it is romanticized and like put like this is the pinnacle of a relationship. And if you don't go through this step, then you don't have a real relationship. Like, it often reads that way to me, and I just don't think that's true. And I think that's really invalidating to a whole lot of relationships. So it was awesome to me that I didn't see it here. I like that a human without any powers is the one who ends up killing the Fae King. I am so relieved too that we didn't really get an amnesia arc from Orrin. I love that she was like mildly befuddled and confused, but had enough drive to just push through it, and then everything just magically clicks into place and she remembers it all. Like, that whole torture stuff didn't happen. I'm sure that was frustrating for some people, but for me personally, since I didn't want to do an amnesia arc, anything that stopped that from happening was good to me. Overall, I think this book was was trying really hard to create a very satisfying book to what has been like an incredibly long and investing journey. And not just for me, like everyone who's read this Plated Prisoner series has read thousands and thousands of pages. You want to make it like feel bigger and larger and go on long enough, but I think in doing so she skipped some of the things that would have actually made it good. Like to me, what would have been satisfying is seeing a final battle standoff in the Fifth Kingdom. I would have loved if Orin had been trapped behind enemy lines and didn't remember herself and like was fighting the memory stuff, like fighting to understand what was going on while all this war and things were going on, and our heroes over on this side were invested in the war and the fighting, but they're also catching glimpses of Orin and seeing that she's confused and trapped and like trying to get to her. We could have had like an espionage behind enemy lines element. We could have been in the thick of it during the battle scenes. This would have given Melina an opportunity to do kind of like a Robin Hood arc, like picking up different stragglers across Aurea and like creating like sort of a mobile army or like a mobile sanctuary, and as she goes, some of the people are like learning to fight and some of the people are learning to protect the others, and she's sort of using her powers as like a dome and shield and protection. Maybe they end up picking off some of the stragglers, or they end up watching by the bridge and relaying information to the front lines. Like there were good roles set up in the last book for everyone that I feel like would have been more satisfying and interesting to watch, and instead we sort of largely kept the cast very separate from each other and made more battles but less detail about what those battles were, and we just powered Orin and Slade up way too much. That said, I think people who were into this story for the romantasy element really get served well in this book, and I think they'll enjoy this. I think some of us who were here for the strong fantasy build are disappointed and let down a little bit at this end, but I understand how you might have fatigue writing in this world and in this journey at this juncture and might have let some of it slide. Or maybe this was Raven Kennedy's plan all along and it's just that she and I have different visions for where the story should have gone. I'm glad I read it, and I'm glad I went through this experience, especially like vlogging it, pulling it apart with you guys. You've made so many wonderful comments and interactions, and I've had so much fun with all of you talking about this series. It's been worthwhile from that aspect alone. I think it's a fun early entry into the romantasy series that has made it all the way into the romantasy like boom era. Also, I think that this is probably one of the few romantasy novels I've read that is strictly adult. Like a lot of these romantasy series come off as very new adult to me, or even like young adult, no matter how they're marketed. So I find it very refreshing that this Plated Prisoner series is firmly for adults and firmly tackles things in, I think, like a more rounded, more adult kind of way. And not just because what happens in it is darker than some of these other romantasies, but like there's a certain level of nuance and complication. It's not always super explained, which I think is good. It leaves readers to make their own conclusions and relies on readers sort of already being familiar with these kind of contents and themes. This has been a great journey. I want to thank all of you for coming with me on it. If you have read the Plated Prisoner series, any part of it, or plan to, go ahead and leave me a bird emoji in those comments down below. And as always, keep reading.